So in that light, I want to introduce our wonderful panelists this morning. I want to start with Perla Herrera. Perla's right here. Perla is an administrative assistant to the head of social enterprises at Catholic Charities Fort Worth. She was raised in Clovis, New Mexico, and moved to Texas in 2014 to seek new opportunities for personal and financial growth. She has a 5-year-old son who's joining us today. I'm very pleased to say his name is Aaron, which I'm very partial to, and her husband Paul as well. She enjoys spending time with her loved ones and capturing special moments through photography and cooking delicious Mexican meals. So I'm sure we'll have more to talk about after this. Next to her is Heather Reynolds. Heather is the managing director of the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities at the University of Notre Dame. Previously, she served as the president and CEO of Catholic Charities Fort Worth for 14 years. She's given expert testimony to Capitol Hill on poverty reform and welfare reform in America. And she was then cited by Congressman Paul Ryan in his white paper on how to reform welfare in America. And the Catholic Charities Fort Worth model was used as an example for others to follow for anti-poverty practices. She acts as a national advisor to the USCCB, that's the U.S. Catholic Bishops Conference, Conference of Bishops, Committee on Migration, and in 2012 was honored as the Center for Nonprofit Management's Nonprofit CEO of the Year. She holds a Bachelor in Social Work from Texas Christian University, a Master's of Social Work from the University of Texas at Arlington, and an Executive MBA from Texas Christian University. And finally, we have Representative James Frank. He is currently serving his 4th term in the Texas House of Representatives. He serves as chairman to the Human Services Committee, as well as he's a member of the Public Health Committee. He was also recently appointed to the House Select Committee on statewide health care costs, as well as the Health and Human Services Transition Legislative Oversight Committee. He's a longtime resident of Wichita Falls, where he owns Sharp Iron Group and Transland, 2 manufacturing companies which have over 100 employees. And yesterday we did get to honor Representative Frank with an award here. So we're very grateful to have him as a champion in the House. So please welcome our guests. Good morning. Okay, I wanted to start this morning in the spirit of Mr. Carney's book, which is really all about individuals and stories. And so at a policy-oriented group like ours, we tend to think of big picture solutions and we look for those levers, and those are very important things, not to diminish those, and we'll be talking more about them this morning. But really, I wanted to orient our conversation around individuals and their stories, and that's why I'm so pleased that Perla was able to join us this morning. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to hear more from you about your story, where you come from, how you got to Texas, and we're so glad you're here, and more about how you got to know Catholic Charities Fort Worth and some of the things that you learned from them and that you might have taught them as well. So can you enlighten us a little bit about that?
Yes, so as I said in my bio, we came from Clovis, New Mexico. About 6 years ago, my husband and I were just recently married. I was pregnant at the time. We came to Fort Worth not knowing anybody. We had no relatives here. We just, out of the bloom, said, let's go to Fort Worth, so we're here. It was a little bit scary, only because we have no family members here, we have no support. We just came to see what we can find, opportunities that Clovis could not offer us. We really wanted to go to school. We wanted to get successful careers. So I came to know Padua about, I think, 4 years ago, I want to say. At first, I came seeking for ways so I can go to school. I was told they could assist me with going to school. So I seek to them, and I got into the Padua pilot program. They walked with us for 3 years. They assisted us. Not only, I guess I wasn't actually, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We came to them to get more, I guess, resource and help, and just so they can walk us through to just help us, just walk with us. And they did.
That's great. Well, that's a good place to start, walking with somebody, right?
Yes.
Well, we're going to hear more about that, and thank you for sharing that. And one thing that I heard as you mentioned, you came from Clovis, New Mexico, and tell us a little bit about Clovis. Is it a place with a lot of community groups or employers, or tell us a little bit about Clovis, would you?
Yeah, no, Clovis is a very, very small town. There's hardly any opportunities there. Very little employers, and just it was not what we anticipated for us,
Right.
for our future.
Right. And so Fort Worth had more of those things, and so you moved, which is, the story, it's kind of an American story, right? You see opportunity in a new place, and you move to it, and it's hard when you don't have connections. And I think that's something we heard about this morning from Mr. Carney, was the idea that the thick social networks, right, that we need just weren't there for you because you were new to town, essentially, right? And so that makes it additionally hard when you're facing, okay, and it's not just employment, it's not just going to school, it's how do I manage childcare, how do I manage all these other million things that are on my plate. So I want to hear more about that this morning, and I want to kick it over to Heather to reflect a little bit on kind of what the Padua program is, its genesis, how it got started, and kind of some of the things that you learned as you worked with that program and designed it, and learned from people like Perla.
Great, thank you, and it's an honor to join you all on this panel this morning. So I had the privilege to spend 17 years at Catholic Charities Fort Worth before my family relocated out of Texas, which is so hard, to South Bend, Indiana. And what was so beautiful about the Catholic Charities team as Padua was built and launched is really the belief, and this runs through, I have been fortunate enough for this to run through my whole career, is the belief in the value of subsidiary, that problems need to be solved at the most local level possible. And that is what really happened with the genesis of Padua, is that Catholic Charities Fort Worth was seeing client after client coming through their doors, and not giving them the full degree of dignity that people deserved, giving them a way out of poverty, but rather it was a lot of like band-aiding and perpetuating the cycle of poverty. And so Padua really became we want more for people who are walking through our doors. We think people deserve more who are walking through our doors. And then it transitioned to the brilliant social workers and case managers at Catholic Charities Fort Worth saying, okay, what have you always wanted? What has always stood in your way of being able to really get people to a different place? And one of the biggest things we heard over and over again from the team of Catholic Charities workers was what Perla just talked about they walked with us. That was the common theme about, so often social services across this country are designed in a way where, we can serve somebody for 3 months and they have to meet exactly this criteria. And we can only do these 3 types of services for them, without recognizing that Perla and her family, she doesn't look at her life in these little segments. We're whole people. And most of us, despite our level of income, when we want to make changes in our life, it's not easy. It takes time to do that. And so the fact that we at Catholic Charities at the time were thinking that people could make changes in just a few months, and that social services is built that way, and policymakers build it that way, is really quite absurd. And so anyway, the launch of Padua was all about, how do we do something different? How do we get rid of all the things that have not allowed social service organizations to achieve what we really desire for people who are coming through our door? And how do we build something better and build something different? Leo, which is an academic research center at the University of Notre Dame, was focused in at the time. We were building, and we were focused in at the time of, we've got all these brilliant economists and academics at Notre Dame who do a great job of research that goes into academic publications that, frankly, nobody other than academics read. And so these folks were saying, we need to do something different. We want our research to have impact. And we want to study not just from big data sets, but we want to study with those we believe know the answer. And those folks who know the answer, in our mind, is those who are closest to the problems, the Catholic Charities Fort Worth of the world. And so one of the beautiful things about Padua is, from the very start, it was designed in a way where a research study could happen. Perla talked about, she called and she was admitted into the Padua pilot. At the time when Padua launched, Catholic Charities Fort Worth had resources to help about 200 people, yet there were far more people who needed Padua. And what that limited amount of resources allowed for is it allowed for Notre Dame to come in. Some people got the services, some people didn't, and we were able to build evidence around what was the impact of Padua. We can hear Perla's story and know what happened to Perla, but what happened to the people who called and didn't get services? And there's metric after metric you can look at, but one of the most beautiful things about Padua in terms of the results is 32% of those who were in the treatment group, who received help, grew their financial conditions by 32% over the control group. And so we were able to study and learn what would have happened had it not been for the intervention of Padua, which is pretty cool because so often things are done in our country with no backing of evidence, and that partnership of academics and social service providers really helps allow for that.
If I can just touch on, I think one of the great things about the program, and one of the reasons that we got involved in trying to remove some of the barriers that policy has put in place of those, is the real goal of their program, and it should be the goal of government programs, is to get all the way to self-sufficiency, to where there's not a need for it. And so many of the programs that we have are really trying to mask the effects of poverty or just keep somebody at a minimum level. It's not to get them all the way out to self-sufficiency where then they can help other people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when you talk a longer-term impact, obviously the concern for policymakers is always you're just creating this long-term effect of leaving somebody in poverty. The focus on getting somebody to self-sufficiency and the pride and honestly just the self-respect that gives somebody is what all of us need to be focusing on. Mm-hmm. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thinking about what you just said, there was something in there that I wanted to key on, which was, it's not just self-sufficiency, it's getting to the point where you can help other people. And one of the themes in Mr. Kearney's book is this idea of not just being needy, but being needed, right? And so I wanted to kind of reflect on that a little bit, and maybe, Perla, feel free to jump in here, but tell us a little bit about how, now that you're on this path and you're now actually in a point of giving back, you're actually at Catholic Charities Fort Worth. Tell us a little bit about what that's like to kind of be on the other side of that now, and your work there and what you're seeing.
It is wonderful. It is very wonderful to. I was on the other path. I was on the other side of Catholic Charities, and now being on the other end and just helping people. I work with social enterprise, which with transportation as well. We provide rides for the people who aren't able to, to go to their doctor appointments, or they aren't able to go to their jobs or anything like that. So it feels really, really good to be able to be on the other side and help those who are needed, as I was.
It's wonderful. Thank you. So Heather, tell us a little bit about it. So Padua is not just a program that focuses merely on the economic angle, meaning, okay, we found you a job, now, we wash our hands of it. Tell us a little bit about, more specifically, the wraparound services that you provide, and Perla just touched on some of those, and how that helps to actually build the social capital that's needed to actually establish long-term self-sufficiency.
Yeah, great question, Erin. So one of the brilliant things about Padua is that it's designed to walk the course of people's lives. It's designed to work with the family at large, and it's designed to help on multiple dimensions of folks' lives, which takes time. And so the great thing about Padua is when a client comes into Padua, they have the opportunity to really be fully understood and assessed. There's a lot of time spent understanding what's going on in that family's life. What do they need? What are their dreams? What are their goals for the future? So it becomes less about what the provider wants for the client, but more about, Perla, what do you want? What motivates you? Not just, we want this arbitrary goal achieved for you. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still the economic goal that Padua wishes to achieve. But knowing that none of that happens in a vacuum, that so much more is needed along the way in order to get there. And so Padua pairs clients with a case manager, and they walk with that case manager over time. I will never forget a meeting I was in, and it was a meeting between Catholic Charities Fort Worth and Leo. And the researchers were talking to the providers, and the researchers were saying, one of the coolest things we're seeing in the data is people have really changed how they're spending their money. And specifically, what Leo was seeing is one of the largest sources of expense for Padua clients at the start were giving money to friends. And they were saying, but this really decreased over the last year. Why did this decrease? And so Leo was able to see in the data things were looking different. Something had changed. But then Catholic Charities Fort Worth was able to articulate why that had happened. And they said, well, we think why that happens is because we work with clients to say, what do you value? And they spend time working with clients to understand what their values are. And then they say, okay, let's look at how you spend your money. And they spend time understanding how a family spends their money. And then they put the two side by side and say, okay, you're saying this is what you're valuing. You're saying this is how you spend your money. What makes sense? Maybe what doesn't, based on seeing these two things. And what the case managers noted in this meeting is that all of a sudden, you could see clients having these ahas. Wait, I'm saying I value this most in my life, but how I'm really spending my money is this way. And what the case managers articulated is, so much in social services, it's about, well, we're going to teach the clients that they need to budget. We're going to teach the clients to do A, B, and C. And what they started to understand, it wasn't about telling people what to do. It was about having people understand things and having their own ahas, that they were more likely to grab those and run with those. And it was beautiful in that time to see in the data what Leo was seeing about this major shift. And then the Catholic Charities case managers articulating the services they were providing and why those shifts were occurring.
That's great.
I told Heather, because Heather ran the boots on the ground in Fort Worth for a long time, and now she's up with the academia. And one of the challenges, honestly, when you work in the social services arena is so many of the decisions are made by people that have actually never provided the services. It's unbelievable. We have major policies at the federal level made by people that have never actually talked to a poor person, or have never tried to work with somebody out of it. I work in CPS a lot. I promise most of the policies made by people who don't have children. It really is amazing, and so I'm thankful that you're up there actually putting real experience, because that's really where it happens.
Well, and that is one of the things I love so much about where I am today at Notre Dame, because, there's a lot of great research labs out there. I think what has been unique about what we're doing is we are finding nonprofits who are closest to the problem, who have the most innovative solutions of how to address the problem, but don't have an academic partner to really help walk alongside of them and help them build evidence. And so just this last year, we've recruited about another 30 nonprofits into our fold who are willing to open their doors and say, we believe in our innovation. We believe in how we have created our model to serve, to help people get to their bigger, brighter future, to help people walk this journey out of poverty, to get back into the workforce, to have the dignity of work. And come in and test us, because there's so many nonprofits out there, not all, but there is a trailblazing group of nonprofits out there who really believe if their successes can be proven up, it will unleash 1,000 more. And that is what is really neat when you start seeing, providers and people who have actually walked those shoes, and academics and policymakers working together. That's when I feel like the three-legged stool is at its best.
That's fantastic. I want to turn it back to Perla. So, Perla, tell me now a little bit about your life now and what it's like, and maybe reflect on any contrast to the past. Are you more involved in your community? Do you have other, we learned about your cooking, which sounds really good. Tell us more about kind of what your life is like now. You've got a son. I presume he's looking at maybe going to school at some point if he's not already there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so with all the life skills that I've learned with Padua, we are, we use it day to day. We budget ourselves. We
It's okay. Don't worry about that. So I guess where I'm coming from is, do you feel like you have a network now to support you, that's around you, that's rooting for you?
Yes, of course. I have a job.
Very important.
Yes, I have a job with Catholic Charities, which I love. My husband, he's there to support us. My son is going to school this year.
Good.
Hopefully. Well, yeah, he is.
You can homeschool too. I was homeschooled. That's always an option.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Okay.
Perla, tell them about your case manager, because I know you've had a really close relationship with your case manager. What about her mattered in your life? What would you guys work on together? What did walking alongside you look like?
Oh my gosh, Jessica. She was my case manager. She's a very energized, positive person that was just always lighting me with, I guess, confidence and, telling me, you can do this, even when I was I did not know I could do that. I remember one day I was telling her what my dreams were. I saw myself coming home from an office job in a, black pants and a cute little blazer, and just sitting with my husband, having dinner, talking about our day. So I envisioned that with her, and she said, well, let's do this. Let's prepare you for an office job. I was like, yeah, no. I'm just going to be a stay-at-home mom forever, and I'm just going to stay here, cook my meals. But she knew that that's not where I wanted to be. She knew that I wanted to do something more with my life. So my team told me about a program that teaches clerical trainings. So they told me about the program. It was 4 months long, and I just could not see myself committing for 4 months in a program that was Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day, I think it was. And I mean, I had my son, which I didn't have childcare for him. The way I was raised is that, nobody else takes care of your kids but you or your relatives, and I didn't have relatives in there with me. So just having the thought of leaving my son with somebody else that I did not know, first of all, that was terrifying. Just the confidence of finishing that program was just very low. I didn't have confidence. Not even if I was going to be accepted in the program, I didn't have confidence in that either. And then another barrier was, well, of course, childcare, but paying for the childcare. We did have, wiggle in our budget to pay for it, but just every month we had things that would pop up that we did not budget for. Like, for example, we had a water leak one day, and the bill came up to like $900. So we're just like, oh my gosh, like that's just too much. So they created a way to help me pay for childcare. They paid 1 month, and then we paid the second month. They paid the third month, and we paid the fourth month. So that was very, I don't know, I saw a lot of hope in that. I said, okay, well, that's doable. But I just still was not confident enough. I was like, I can't do this. I can't leave my 1-year-old at a daycare. And yeah, we sat down, we had a long conversation. My husband was there. He was also very motivating. He said, why can't you do this? You can do this. Like, we can both do this. But I just kept wanting to do more excuses. And Jessica she was like, you know that you can do this and you want to do this. Just do it. So she was very, very, very motivating. She believed in me way more than what I believed in myself. So I ended up doing it. About 1 month along the way, I had a meeting with her, and she saw me totally transform, I guess. Like, I was wearing heels, I was wearing a dress, and she noticed how confident I was in myself, the way I was speaking, the way I was sending her emails and everything. And she saw that. She pointed that out to me, and that just gave me more motivation that, it's possible. I can do this. I need to quit being scared. And that just motivated more. I finished the program. I was still scared that I was not going to be, I guess, employed, or that I wasn't going to be good enough for the employer. But I just kept going, and with her motivation is just her positivism just came to me, and I was able to do that. And I was able to get me a job at Catholic Charities, which I love.
What a wonderful way to sort of come from there, and then also to be able to give back. And I love that. I wanted to think a little bit about kind of what you said in terms of the investment the case managers make in the lives of the folks that they're helping, right? And thinking about that seems like something, as we sometimes say, that doesn't scale very well. I mean, it takes a human investment at a human level, and so this is something, again, kind of getting back to your point about subsidiarity, having the people in the community being the most invested to actually to walk with you and give you that encouragement as you need it. And to get to know you as an individual and see you not as a number, and not just as somebody they've got to process through the system, but someone who has worth and dignity and is worth investing their time and their love into. And so I kind of want to kick it over to you, Representative Frank, and start reflecting a little bit on the ideas here that we've been hearing about. Carney writes a lot about the well-being of communities being the well-being of the individual.
Right.
And so he quotes Jeremiah here, right? I wanted to kind of ask you, what do what are some Texas policies that could foster civic society and enable, individual thriving better?
Yeah, you mentioned the word, it doesn't scale very well.
Yeah.
And that's very what people talk about
Yeah.
in this arena, right? Because you're going to create a program, and the program's going to be run out of Austin
Right.
or run out of DC, and it's going to fix everything. And the reality is that's not the way it's done. It is scalable. There's 330 million of us in the country, but there's not a program that's going to lift people out. It's going to be individuals one by one by one. And that's what, frankly, I'm in manufacturing. I got 140 employees. I understand manufacturing, but that mentality doesn't work in this environment. And yet everybody does. They talk that way. The academics talk that way. How are we going to do this? We need evidence-based. I'm like, there's a lot of evidence over thousands of years how people get out of poverty, and it's usually an individual helping mentor them. All we do typically is just mask the effects of poverty with money and programs. One of the things that we did at the behest of Catholic Charities and others was to try to remove some of the barriers of the programs. A lot of things that they were doing are trying to get people out of poverty. A lot of the government programs that we have make it hard to get out of poverty. And when I say hard, they create cliffs where if I work overtime, I'm going to get less money because I'm going to, I'll get more money from my employer, but I'm going to drop $500 a month in this program or that program. Those kind of things, when you imagine, I don't know how many of y'all, if you had a choice of working an extra 5 hours of overtime and you would get less money for it, how many of y'all are signing up for that? Anyone? Okay, or I'm making $12 an hour, I can take a job for 15, but I'll go backwards in my pay. Anyone taking that job? No. And it's just crazy, all of the different things that we do. It's like perverse incentive after perverse incentive to encourage people not to work. And so is the purpose of government programs to get people out of poverty or keep them dependent on poverty? Well, duh. So we passed a bill, that's really academic. That was very good. Sorry, that was good. But I mean, so much of this is just, it doesn't make sense how we've done it. And we passed a bill, was it just last session? Okay, last session, to try to remove some of the welfare cliffs. But frankly, there's still huge welfare cliffs out there. We didn't even touch Medicaid. This was just a very small one. But it's a federal one, so we have to do a mother may I between the state government and the federal government asking for a waiver and more evidence and all this stuff. But all of that churn is because everything is being forced down from on high, whether that's on high in DC or on high, and making it more difficult for 330 million people to try to help each other out of poverty.
It's really important.
Into self-sufficiency, because it's not, I can pay you, we can tax enough, pay everybody to be out of poverty and have enough money. But there's a big difference between working and taking care of yourself and helping others versus not. Just real quick, we adopted a couple boys out of foster care, 11 and 9. When the first time they helped somebody else, we changed their poverty like that. Yeah. Their poverty changed immediately. But their mentality and their thoughts about themselves didn't change until they finally started helping someone else. And then they had worth. So we can pay people and have them financially out of poverty. That will not help their souls, their feeling about themselves, their reason to get up in the morning. And that's why those plans are never going to work. I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, please continue.
Preach
That was, preach all day. One of the themes also, there were a couple of chapters in Carney's book on this kind of almost bipolar way that we think about policy in our country. On the one hand, centralization, which gets to your point, all the calls are getting made from DC or Austin, and then atomization, right, of the individual feeling completely helpless in the face of this faceless bureaucracy, whereas true charity comes face to face from the heart.
Absolutely.
And that's something that Catholic Charities has really embodied, I think, in this program and in so many of their other great programs that they reach out and do. And thinking more about that question of meaning, and it came up yesterday in our talk with the Bonton Farms folks, and how it starts it didn't start by them writing a check and saying, hey, we're going to pay you to work here. It was like, hey, let's build you a resume. Let's get you, doing some work around here and start building the worth that you can actually serve your neighbors. And it was from there that you could build all of the skills and that self-worth that we've been talking about. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about obstacles that may be facing folks who are wanting to go from a position of feeling kind of isolated and alienated to a place of belonging. And some of these things are policy issues that that our central government puts into place. And so I'd just like to ask maybe you, Heather, or you, Perla, or even you, Representative Frank, if you've got any other thoughts on key policy barriers that keep coming up again and again as themes for people, issues that just really don't make any sense but need to be addressed. So.
I mean, a couple of key policy things I would argue that we need to think about is, one, policy needs to look at a different end goal than just, food stamps can't be about not being hungry. It needs to be about something else. And so we need to look at that different end goal, and we need to hold folks accountable and measure that end goal. And so I'd say that's one thing. I'd say another thing is, like you talked about, there's so many ways programs get developed in our country that are based on what people who have never encountered people in poverty are developing. And we just can't have that. It needs to be based on experience, and it needs to be based on what evidence is telling us. And then I'd say the other thing that we see again and again and again in the evidence, it's not rocket scientists. It is really about walking with people. And people will say, oh, well, that's more expensive. And it is. Padua is more expensive than just giving financial assistance. But at the end of the day, we've got to start looking at so many of our social programs with a longer term view, and we've got to look at them in a way of more of a return on investment, not just how much does this cost versus this cost, because we're paying for it as a country in many, many ways. And so let's pay for it in the right way that actually involves a sense of dignity. The other policy issue that I think is really critical is the issue of making sure that work always pays. And that's why the bill that was passed last session in Texas is so critical, because we've got to make it where people in poverty, often folks can't leap out of poverty. Perla's story, she was in a spot where she needed to go to school for 4 months and get some specific training so she could get into a job that would allow her family to be self-sufficient. We need more policy that really honors that and helps propel people forward.
That's great. I was thinking through this, and one of the things that we've it's funny, we think about this whole welfare to work paradigm, right? But really what I'm hearing more about today, I mean, work is obviously very important, but it really is so much more than the dollars and cents. It's that sense of purpose and dignity that really needs to be encouraged from the very beginning of this. One of the themes, too, that Mr. Carney brings up is this idea of sort of crowding out, right? So where we have programs, federal programs, state programs, usually federal, let's face it, these tend to crowd out local efforts to alleviate these kinds of these crises of meaning, essentially, right? So I just wanted to ask you guys if you've got any reflections on that, any thoughts on that, where the well-meaning programs that have been created have sometimes displaced the need for communities to actually step up and serve their own people. It's more time-consuming, perhaps, for the community, but perhaps also imparts a sense of meaning. So if you guys could reflect on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I do think most of those programs have created it where people feel like they don't need each other.
Yeah.
You get, it's easier to receive a check from the government than it is to help your neighbor. And you kind of say, well, I don't need to help him. He should be getting paid for that. And there are a lot of, frankly, there's a lot of other perverse incentives. If you look at the number of incentives that will pay somebody more if they will get rid of their husband. Mm-hmm. If they're married, they get this. If they'll get rid of the husband, they get that. Well, that's a pretty significant disincentive, particularly when you consider the evidence, frankly, of what a two-parent household does and the ability to get out of poverty with a two-parent household that doesn't exist with a one-parent household. Not to take anything away from anybody who does it. My mom had to do it for a little while. It's a tough thing. Mm-hmm. But we shouldn't have policies that encourage that. Right. That's just a special kind of crazy. And so, at the end of the day, we need to look at the programs and say, what behavior are they incenting? Because those programs do incent behavior. If you incent somebody not to work or you punish them for working, most of them aren't going to work. A few might get through, but most are going to stop working at the point you incent them to stop working. And we still have the Medicaid, even if, I appreciate you saying this was a really important bill, but it's really just a small start, because the Medicaid cliff is still there. If I work, all of a sudden I drop off completely with the medical. And we could, with the same money, because I believe we are spending a huge amount of money that really, if we just did it right, we would save money. It would not. Yeah, there is money spent in so many different programs, Section 8 housing, food stamps. I mean, there's all these programs, but they're all disparate programs that are not tied, right? You don't have somebody saying, well, no, really, how much can you afford to pay? And as long as you're willing to pay your part of the child care, I'll help you. Well, that's not the way the government program works. The way the government program works is, here's a form. If you qualify or if you'll cheat on it, then you can get that $500. Well, that's just, and then we say, well, how come those programs are so poorly used? Well, because they incent stealing and bad behavior and all that stuff so anyway, so it has to be done at the local level.
I had an amazing opportunity yesterday. I spent the night at this Austin organization called Mobile Loaves and Fishes. If you haven't been out there, go out there. They are an organization working specifically with the chronically homeless. And I think this was a good parallel for me to see. There's been a lot of focus in our country from a policy standpoint on housing first. And it makes sense. It's logical to think that it's really hard for somebody to get a job if they don't have a place to go that call home at night. It's really hard for people to get to their bigger, brighter future if they're living on a street or in camps. But unfortunately, the model like housing first, what it kind of became throughout our country is not housing first and then it became housing. And when you look at what Mobile Loaves and Fishes has done, their belief is not housing first. They believe housing is critical, but their belief is community first. And so their focus is bringing folks into their community, which is about 250 tiny homes on this acreage in Austin. They're doubling in the next year. And they have the chronically homeless who are willing to work, and that can mean a whole variety of things, live there. So yes, they are housed. Their housing metric goes up. But if you look at these folks and if you understand and you start seeing the numbers of reduction of ER visits, reduction of fire and police dollars, all of these other things that are happening to these families because of a community-first mindset. It's not just about housing them and isolating them, an apartment over here, an apartment over here. It's about bringing them into a community that they feel proud of and then giving them the dignity of worth where they add value every day to what they're doing. To me, it was just an interesting parallel between this big national movement we have had on housing first, where there is great evidence of increasing those who are housed, but just the dignity and what we're doing with these folks contributing in our society just blew me away to see that.
I was just thinking of the housing first, how that got done politically. I'm sure it's like, well, let's see, if I can fund $100 million, I can build this many houses. And, and it's like there's not the full, does anybody ever get out?
Yeah, that's right.
Or, they got put in a house and that was good and we move on to the next issue. That's the way, y'all may be disappointed, but sometimes that's the way policy works.
And that's the beauty of what Perla gets to do every day at Catholic Charities Fort Worth is it's not just stop there. It's let's keep going. And what do we need? And then how do we get there? So people like Perla now can live her bigger, brighter future and come home at night in her fabulous suit, feeling proud of what she's contributing.
So that really brings us to some sort of bigger themes that we've been talking about, which is it's not just the self-sufficiency for the sake of self-sufficiency. It's self-sufficiency to give back, and then that's how you scale. That's the secret to it, right? Is that it's individual to individual, but network effects are real. It doesn't have to be planned from the central government, provided that you get out of the way a little bit and let these wonderful nexuses take root. And so thinking about that and the fact that Catholic Charities is a Catholic organization, it's no shock that that's part of the name. Could you reflect, any of you guys reflect what you think the faith element here is and how connected they are to the local parishes and how the parishes play a role in maybe referring people, or how does that all work together in the Fort Worth area? And I'm happy to open it up to any of you guys who have thoughts on that. Okay.
So I would say at Catholic Charities Fort Worth, it's a very strong faith-based organization that does what it does because it is Catholic. And the great thing about Catholic charities throughout the state of Texas, throughout the country, is although they are Catholic and uphold their faith traditions and do the work out of stemming from Catholic social and moral teaching, the core, they serve everyone. We used to have this silly tagline at Catholic Charities Fort Worth. I don't know if it's used anymore, but we serve people, we serve everyone, even Catholics. And the idea of that is, you know, the faith-based community folks throughout this country are doing some of the most important, innovative work. And that's definitely the case of Catholic Charities Fort Worth. What I always loved about the Catholic Charities Fort Worth mission, it is to provide service to those in need, critical, right, Perla, to advocate compassion and justice in the structures of society, again, Perla, the work on the benefit cliff, those things, and to call others of goodwill to do the same. And that really is about engagement at the parish level and just the community at large level. And what I always thought was so beautiful about the mission is it wasn't just to serve. It was to serve, to advocate, and convene, meaning it was just as important as a faith-based organization to engage others in this work as it was to serve people who needed the help.
You know, it's funny, as a Baptist up here, who loves what Catholic Charities does. I think what's ironic and what I've realized, and one of the reasons I love working with them and the bishops, is they're one of the few faith-based organizations, maybe the only one, that is big enough to play in the political minefield that has been created. You know, there's tons of faith-based organizations of all kinds, Christian and others, that are trying to do this work and face some of the political pitfalls that we have created, but they don't know how to get around it. They just feel, I think you were talking, there's just like this bureaucracy that they don't know how to get around. And frankly, I think Catholic Charities has taken the lead on trying to fix some of those things. You know, frankly, having to go through all the evidence-based stuff to prove what is largely common sense, but prove it in a way that will be meaningful to a 30-year-old on Capitol Hill in a really long report. And so I think y'all do play a vital role in trying to free up all of the faith-based and honestly some of the non-faith-based. There's some non-faith-based people that do it because it feels good, which honestly, if I could get on a soapbox for just a second, one of the real problems with a lot of the programs is they are set up to make the doer feel good about how dependent the other person is on them, right? It's how I feel as opposed to helping them out of poverty. If you're out of poverty, you don't need me anymore. Whether I'm the government or whether I'm that person trying to help. And so many people that I see are in it for the feeling that they have. You know, it's kind of like the person who doesn't want their child to grow up. I got 6 boys. I want them to grow up and out of the house. You know, we're raising men, we're not raising kids, and it's kind of the same thing when you're doing charity work. You should be wanting them to be dependent. I know in some cases you've got special needs adults and those kind of things that you're never going to be, but the vast, vast, vast majority of people should be helping other people, not still, you know, taking charity, basically.
It's fantastic. I wanted to close our comments from the stage with a quotation that Mr. Carney uses as sort of a leitmotif throughout the book. He uses this quotation from the book of Jeremiah, and I wanted to close with that and some of his reflections on that verse. And then after we're done, we're going to open it up for questions. And we do have people with microphones, do we not, to take questions? Yes, we do. Emily will be manning the microphone. And so if you would raise your hand, and she will come over and let you speak into the mic. The purpose of the mic is not for the room, but for the streaming video. So if you could wait until the mic comes to you and then speak into it, that would be most helpful for those who aren't able to join us in person today. So the quotation is, "Seek the shalom of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it is in its shalom will be your shalom." And so he uses the word shalom as being well-being, thriving. And so he says the Hebrew word ir, which means city, conveys a sense of localness, of small scale. This local city is where the solutions will be. If we care about human flourishing or shalom, then we need to care about the local and attend to it. The city is not theirs, but they have to look out for it anyway. And so I wanted to thank you guys for coming, and then we'll be opening up to the panel for questions. Thank you. Please remember to phrase your statement in the form of a question as well. Thank you.
Thank you. There's 2 over there.
Hello? Okay, it works. This may sound inelegant, but I'm just going to say it. I have suspicions about the lifers on welfare and help programs and things like that. And I didn't know if you had, you hear phrases like poverty breeds poverty. And you know about cases where people are gaming the system. They game this system because they know they can get this benefit, and then they go over here and game this system and get another benefit. Does the Catholic Charities have statistics about how many people come through? Are they on welfare when they hit Catholic Charities? Are they doing both? Are they doing one or the other? I mean, I'd like to know how successful something like, I know that welfare isn't successful. I think it should be temporary. I don't really have a good understanding about how long you can stay on welfare. I have an impression about some people that are lifers. But with the Catholic Charities, what is the success ratio of actually moving these people into communities where they do thrive? Or do they also just have this kind of lifetime assistance? Not a bad thing, but just curious.
So since I don't work for Catholic Charities anymore, it might be most helpful if you reach out to them, and we have some women in the audience who work there and can give you some more specifics. I can talk from my past experience and then also more generally. I would say that that there should be a high degree of belief for organizations like Catholic Charities Fort Worth, who are not only saying we want an end goal for people in need to be living wage income, savings, no harmful debt, and off-government assistance. That should be, to me, super applauded, that that's the end goal. And then the other piece is that organizations like Catholic Charities Fort Worth, who are saying, come in, researchers, you might find, and we have at Leo found stuff that Catholic Charities Fort Worth is doing that isn't working. Come in, Leo, researchers, test what we're doing, because we didn't get into this work to keep things status quo. We got into this work so Perla's family could be out of poverty. And so again and again, there are organizations that I think are really worth applauding, like Catholic Charities Fort Worth, that are about a different end goal and about using research and evidence to inform and shape the services they're doing. Does everyone get out of poverty? I am sure the answer to that is no. Are there people in the system who take advantage of welfare? Yes. But the good majority of people that I've always experienced in my career, man, they do not want to be in poverty. They are part of a system that's confusing to them. And often, I mean, there's been so much in recent years, or that I'm aware of, that has come out about the brain and the impact of trauma. And I think that what we have to realize is somebody who has lived in poverty their whole life, maybe grew up in Section 8 housing with their mother or their grandmother, didn't have a two-parent household to help provide them what they needed, maybe experienced abuse and neglect and a whole variety of things. When they turn 18, that same brain is with them. It's not the brain of me who grew up in a two-parent household and never experienced poverty a day in my life. It is a brain that has been severely traumatized. And the time and energy it takes to move families there to a place, it takes a while. And so, yeah, I'm sure there are people who take advantage. Generally speaking, what we see is in the policy space, time-limited welfare programs, government programs that aren't necessarily with the end goal that maybe others of us would appreciate, and then the nonprofit community doing the best they can, often with their hands tied behind their back, trying to walk with the Perlas and get them to a place of out of poverty.
And certainly not all the nonprofits work great, but almost all of them are using their own money, including Catholic Charities is using, or I guess other people that give money for that purpose, right? And so they are using that, and so they are mindful of trying to make it a temporary, and they have a goal that is different than, I think, the federal programs. I think the reason you do have so much abuse of the federal programs is because they're set up with perverse incentives. They're set up not to get somebody out, and until those are set up, people are going to, they say game the system. It's use the system to their best interest as they perceive it. And that's a shame. Yeah. But it's a shame because the way the system is set up, and there's responsibility on both sides because you don't have to take advantage of it just because it's there. But I think until the feds change those programs, you are going to have people that are, quote, abusing the system, but they're really just using the system that is set up with really bad incentives.
I love the incentive talk because I think that's a critical piece of this conversation. We've just completed a study with one of our partners, Catholic Charities Chicago, and they run their local community's homelessness prevention hotline. And many major cities across the United States have these hotlines. And people call and say, I'm about to be evicted, I need financial assistance. And if you look at these hotlines across the country, the way success is measured and the funding flows for them is based on numbers of calls that are answered. And that's the incentive, is you answer more calls.
Shocking.
That is what success looks like. Where Catholic Charities Chicago said, we want to know if we're actually preventing homelessness.
Yeah.
And so we ran a study with them that showed it was a 70% reduction in homelessness and that sort of thing, because that was the end goal there. But, so often our incentives aren't set up in a way that lead to why the program was created.
Yeah, because people are actually very rational and can figure the system out. We have a very complex system that people in low income can figure out because they are smart and they are rational and they are going to do what is in their best interest. Our problem is we've set it up for a more permanent situation than we should. And I say we, I'm going to take some responsibility because surely the state can do something. But
how can we compassionately look at, and I've been a lifetime supporter of Catholic Charities, compassionately look at self-destructive behavior, whether it's chemical dependency, narcotics. It could be something my wife teaches in Title I schools where you refuse to learn English that would help you out in a situation, or maybe refuse to learn a job skill that could get you a job, or even go back to get your GED. How can we address that as in a means test, either from a charities perspective or from a legislative perspective?
I think I think there needs to be more studies done specifically with that population, because I think a lot of the evidence that's out there is really about the symptoms, not about the root. And so, oftentimes chemical dependency and things like that is masking something else. And so oftentimes we're treating the chemical dependency, which obviously I'm a big supporter that needs to be treated, but we're also we're not having the bandwidth to also treat what is the something else. And so I would say more evidence in that space is really critical. We're getting ready to run a series of projects at Leo that are all focused, we focused as a country a lot in the last several years on prisoner reentry. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic because we look at how many people who are incarcerated, enter back into society and then end up back in prison. And we see again and again that, that there's a high rate of return to prison. And you look at that, and the very concept of prisoner reentry makes the assumption that these folks were already doing great, and it was the crime that disenfranchised them with society, where the reality is, stuff was happening way before. And so just as an example, we're going to run a series of projects all focused at the local jail level, because we find people end up in prison have had multiple steps with local criminal justice systems, almost as more of a criminal justice prevention effort. And I just use that as an example to say, again, we're often focused on finding folks at a place where we're treating whatever we see instead of going underneath the surface and understanding what that's all about.
I mean, it's always easier to help somebody who's wanting help. I think it does take a person or a mentor, not a program. I look at your story, and you were like, well, I don't know how to do this. I'm not comfortable taking that test. I talked to an 18-year-old foster kid that was like, well, they didn't know they were supposed to sign up to go to college. They wanted to go but didn't know to do that, right? So the problem is there's not programs. It is individual, and it's really hard, and especially when you get somebody strung out on drugs or that kind of stuff. That is, yeah, it's more than a policy problem, because then or more than a policy solution, because it's like, well, you can put them in jail, you can house them. How much do you do? I think if we could at least help the people that want help, that would be a really good start, and because then we would have more time to focus on the really almost impossible to help. It's a bad answer. But
No.
Hi. So I think it's my question's about apprenticeships, and it seems like apprenticeships in this country are not very common, and especially compared to places like Germany. And I want to blame it on a lot of, these laws that get passed in the name of workers' rights. And I know there's a lot of risk to hiring somebody, but just genuinely someone who wants to just spend a few months with someone who knows what they're doing to learn how to do that. Like I said, I want to blame it on, a lot of these worker rights type policies that create that extra risk and they do whatever the opposite of incentivizing hiring people is. Mm-hmm. But if you look at places like Germany, they actually have more workers' right policies than we do, and they seem to have these apprenticeships. So I'm just wondering if you have some explanation for why that's not a common thing in this country and what we could do to encourage it.
I'll try to take it in manufacturing. I mean, we can't have anybody in there. You're right, there is some of that. We can't have anybody in our shop under 18. Period. So all of the trade skills, welders, machinists, sheet metal, we cannot have it from a legal standpoint. I guess I can have my sons, but that's the only one under it. You just can't have it. So there is absolutely, I've never really thought about that issue. We ought to look at what Germany has on that and honestly, we've got a situation where we don't think kids are supposed to work. And that's unhealthy. Frankly, most kids have way too much time. And nothing to do. So that's why, you go, why are they addicted to video games? Well, let's see, they're not doing, after they get done with school, what are they supposed to do? Okay, so we give sports, we do all that. It's like, but what if they want to learn, if they don't love sports, what do you do? So I do think we need to look at that. Heck, now we're trying to act like a kid's not a kid until they're 26. I don't know how old it's eventually going to be, but I do think kids that are able to work early, I'd be happy to try to look at that. I really hadn't thought about it, but it's a great point. And kids do have way too much time. You don't have enough time. Kids have way too much time. In fact, I did tell my own kids. I said, y'all don't like going to school, right? No. And I said, you know why kids used to like going to school? Because they were getting up at 5 a.m. and farming. And so when you got to the end of summer, you're going, yeah, I want to go to school. Yeah, right. Well, who wants to go to school now if you get to swim and play and, be on computer all day? Why would you want to go to school? Now it's a negative concept. And part of that's not allowing a kid to do anything hard. And that's crazy.
We do have some research at TPPF on the issue of apprenticeships, and I hope that you'll look at that. We're very interested in encouraging those and hope that more people will see the benefits. I'm glad to hear you're already there. Do we have any other questions? I think we've got time for one more. So, okay, time for two more. Yes, this one and over here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Marta Fierro, and I just want to thank you, Perla, because it takes a lot of courage for you to be up there, and I thank you for everything that you're sharing with us. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm also a person that came here from Mexico, actually, and actually came for the American Dream at the age of 7, and now I'm running as a state representative for House District 145. And thank you. In most of my district, we have this situation. It's about 90% of poverty. I'm not lying to you. We are located in the city of Houston. And the way it is, my goodness. But I thank you for speaking to us today, Representative. But I wanted to ask both of you, Aaron and Representative James Frank, you touched on different things. You said that you had last night gone to this organization of what is it?
Mobile Loaves and Fishes.
Yes, and I find that very unique as how they work, but then I don't understand how they can have great results and yet our bills and our programs are, not doing great results. On how can we replicate what they're doing and put that into these programs? How can we change that? How can we start a conversation about that and start implementing in the next legislation? Thank you.
I mean, the quick answer to me would be go, if you can go, if any of you can go. If you haven't met Alan Graham, their founder and CEO, go out there, spend a couple hours, spend the night, and really talk to him about his ideas for how to shift the policy discussion toward their model. Their model is really amazing.
A lot of the policy is making sure that we're not hindering them, that we're freeing them to do their work. It's crazy that you say we're going to try to free people to help other people. And yet that's really what it is in many cases. It's we're allowing them to help other people, or we're at least lowering some of the problems that we have created.
Hello? There we go. Hi. Okay, my question is for you, Representative Frank. Creative destruction has moved a lot of parts of our world forward, but I understand when it comes to entitlement programs, it's really difficult to remove those because people are very passionate and they depend on those. So it's hard to get those removed. So I guess my question would be, if you have a program that a group like Catholic Charities of Fort Worth or that Leo has identified that's going to be actually effective, do you think we would ever be able to implement it and pass it if it meant that those other programs had to be retired?
That's a great question. I don't think if you made it readily evident at the start that those programs would go away, but if you took the need for those programs away because of better programs, then eventually they would go away quietly. If the need is not there, then the program's not there. In some cases, in some cases, programs are still there whether there's a need or not. I don't know if I answered that question very well, but it's politically, if you just came and said, hey, we're going to get rid of this and we're going to replace it with that, that's never going to work. If you find a way to build a better mousetrap that has better incentives, and frankly, we can, if we change the incentives within a bad program, it maybe is not as bad and eventually works its way out of being a bad program and eventually works its way out of need. You know, the idea that we're just going to stop all that and is probably not politically something that's going to happen. So the next, that makes sense? So tweaking it and making it a better program with positive incentives. At the end of the day, every program should encourage people to do better for themselves. You can provide a safety net, but every step along the way should encourage you to make good decisions. And it should discourage you, frankly, from making bad decisions. You know, I mean, how many people, y'all raise kids, right? If you want them to stop something, you reward them, or it's not, that's why I'm saying that, evidence-based, but people are rational beings. They do things that are in their best interest. When we set programs up with backward motivations, that's what happens. So I think we have to realign those programs.
And I think something that would also be helpful is if you look across the country, less than 1% of anti-poverty government programs are backed by evidence if they work or don't work. And I would say like a healthier way to address some of this would be when the federal government, for example, wants to solve a certain problem, instead of saying this is how that problem needs to be solved, instead saying these are the intended outcomes we expect. And then we need nonprofits to either come to the table with evidence-backed solutions or a willing to test those things. And then those nonprofits be rewarded based on growing programs over time. I think a model like that, I don't know if that could actually happen, but it would be amazing.
Well, and I think if you look at most policy discussions, all of the discussion is about what we are going to do. There's almost never here's the outcome we're seeking, and here's how we're going to measure it. We never get around to that, and we never say, if we don't hit it, we're going to change. We just say, we're going to build houses, that'll fix homelessness. We're going to, add food stamps, that'll fix people being hungry. We're going to add, there's very little outcome-based,
I think that's a fitting place to end. We talk about meeting material needs, and that's vitally important, and nobody could deny how important that is. But it's the gap in meaning that we really need to be looking at. And so with that, I want to encourage y'all, if you get a chance to pick up this book, it's really a game changer, I think. You can read it from basically any side of the aisle, and you'll benefit from it. And then the second thing is to get engaged in your local community and stop looking to Austin all the time, because we live here, and at least I do. And, I promise you that nobody here has better answers than you do in your local communities. So with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your policy orientation.